warned. Yes, turn your mic on, please.
Oh my gosh. Did you say that out loud?
He said that out loud. He probably said that out loud.
His mic's good? Yeah, hit it one more time. Yeah, just keep hitting it till it turns green. Hit it again. You're fine. Yeah, just hit it.
Last time it had turned green, but then it went back
Like
red.
convert them
And that's why I
to
started
a
over.
voice, like an MP3 file.
I have no idea.
But I don't know, I mean, that was,
Clearly.
yes. His iPhone allows you just to do that. That's probably the difference now. But just know there are
Big country,
apps,
it's like
and I don't remember,
you're worried to
I
go
know it's
to
9 years, I don't know
Texas
what I
to know
did,
what's
but they are
It's
saved
actually
as
quite large.
audio
It really
files
is.
Mother-in-law
in
got
that.
Cherokee, North Carolina, break to go camping. 100 miles away from where we were. Four dead bodies.
But it'll save like an audio
Hard.
I'm sorry.
It's fine. You're cracking me up.
All right, I've got 5:45, so we will go ahead and call the meeting to order. If everyone would stand for a moment of silence and then the pledge. Thank you. Madam Recorder, if you'd call the roll.
Chairman Floyd,
Present.
Vice Chair Harrison, Deborah Thomas,
Present?
Jeremy Burnett,
Here.
Michelle Childs,
Here.
Superintendent Horrell.
Here.
We do have a quorum. Mr. Superintendent, will you lead us through our agenda?
Certainly will. First item on the agenda is the opportunity for public comment.
Anyone from the public like to speak? Hearing none. Next item.
Next item is the report section, starting with the chairman's welcome.
I'd like to welcome everyone to our work session for November. It's hard to believe it's November. We've entered into the second 9 weeks of the semester, and the semester is rapidly closing before us. And we have, I guess, a unique TLN report that we're all very excited to hear. Some things have happened. We'll let Ms. Childs elaborate on that as we move through our agenda. That concludes my report. Dr. Horrell, if you'll continue leading us through our agenda.
Next item is the TLN representative update.
Okay.
The floor is yours.
For an unprecedented report.
Okay, so the General Assembly last week met for 3 days, and they concluded at 1:30 in the morning on Saturday morning. And there was quite a bit of legislation that came out of that. So I'm gonna go through three bills that seem to be the ones that most affect us. And feel free to ask me questions after each one or at the end, and we'll also rely on our amazing attorney to help us with this as well. Okay, so the first one I'm gonna start with is SB 9009, HB 9072 by McNally and Sexton. This created the opportunity for partisan school board elections. Did not require it. The conditions are a little odd for us, I guess I'll say, because one county primary board of a political party can decide to conduct partisan elections. Although we aren't county, so they didn't specify anything for municipal elections.
I'll just add. You'll have to.
Yeah.
I appreciate it. Gotta get you in the mic. Yeah, to head towards.
On, and there was a lot to look at today, and by looking at it, it was unclear. I had a better answer, but that's the best.
There's also special districts, and they didn't, I mean, there's several types of school boards that aren't just county school boards, and those were not addressed with this bill. All right. Okay, next. This was actually not in the TSBA summary, and I guess because it only covered 6 counties, but I did want to make mention HB 9076 and SB 9013. And this was the bill that specifically removed certain powers from the 6 independent health departments. And what this bill did was give the governor exclusive jurisdiction for executive orders with respect to county health departments. County health departments cannot refuse to comply with executive orders. The Commissioner of Health will appoint the county health director. It also removes the county health officer enforcement actions. And it specifically lists the commissioner is the one responsible for doing quarantines. So for our county, this changes things greatly, but then a lot of things were also duplicated in the next bill that everyone's talking about. Is there anything you wanted to say about that one? And my understanding is at this point, all the bills, because there was a lot of bills, not just education bills, that they're all still waiting on the governor's signature. Because everyone's talking about the omnibus, but there's quite a bit of legislation that was passed in those 3 days. Okay, the one that has probably gotten the most talk is SB 9014, HB 9077 by McNally and Sexton. This is the omnibus bill. Bill prohibits school districts from mandating COVID-19 vaccines, for the most part, it bans face covering mandates. Of course, it's optional to wear them, but the mandate part was removed. The only way that face coverings can be mandated, has 5 different pieces, is very specific to how many cases there are, that a principal asks, that it's only 14 days, that it's on a school-by-school basis. It also requires that school districts provide N95 masks for those 12 and up, and a similar type mask for those who are under 12. And it gives some really specific guidelines about special education, American Disabilities Act, when a parent or guardian is requesting that the students in the classroom with their student wear face coverings. And TSBA gave some strong language that if this event were to occur, that you would need to have your board attorney help you through this, essentially. Okay. And then before I turn it over to you, schools cannot quarantine. No one can quarantine, businesses or schools or any other entity except for the Commissioner of Health, and the Commissioner of Health is supposed to be putting giving better guidelines at some point. We don't know when we'll get those, but part of the law says that they must be written, because this is different than, we've been under the Shelby County Health Department quarantine rules, but the state of Tennessee rules are very different than the county rules we've been under. But then this law is basically eliminating those as well, is the way I'm reading it. And like I said before, this is not law just yet. It is waiting the governor's signature, and if he chooses not to sign it, then it will become law 10 days after the legislation will pass, excluding Sundays.
Mr. Plumley, would you like to add anything to this report?
Will add, if I may, and I've spoken with Mr. Plumley about it, and let me know if anything has changed your mind. Our understanding currently, based on the masking legislation, is that once we get word that that bill has been signed into law, we will notify our parents that effective immediately, masking is optional in schools per the recently passed legislation. As you all know, and Mr. Plumley knows, and our parents know, we have swung from the health department says we're in masks, the governor says you can opt out, the judge says you can't opt out. And we believe that the prevailing authority under the most recent action is the state legislature that would say, in the absence of some other action by another authority that overrode that, would be that effective immediately, presumably when that is signed, that the repercussions at our schools will be that masks will go back to being optional.
We have several members with questions. I'm going to start with Ms. Harrison, and we'll work our way down the table.
Well, the omnibus bill has a sunset of July 1st, 2023, but there were several legislatures that just said that it could always be extended, but that's what it is right now. I think so.
Yeah.
So we had this conversation before, but I want to say it so it goes on the record. The mask provision that would allow a school board to even consider enacting a mask provision or mask requirement, was the benchmark was 1,000 new cases per 100,000 residents. Give me a number of what the highest amount that was during the past year or so.
It was a rough one, but I know it got up to or maybe briefly crossed 1,000 a day for Shelby County, I believe was the peak for us and around January of last year.
That would be about a 9-factor shortfall of that 1,000 per 100,000 requirement.
Yes.
So even though the bill does give the school boards the authority, there's that benchmark that would have to be met.
Yes, I mean, I think if I'm doing this right, basically what we had at the peak was 1,000 cases per roughly 900,000, and the one in the legislation is 1,000 per 100,000. So,
Any other questions on the Ms. Harrison?
Yes, that's for the county. Okay. But that would be up to the school board to make this masking, which could only be 14 days and only on a school-by-school basis at the request of the principal for it to be considered and having met that trip mark.
First thing, or that is, it has.
Yes.
Any other, Mr. Burnett?
So we spent some time discussing these two words before, quarantine versus exclusion. Are these interchangeable for the purposes of this legislation? The legislation says quarantine, but we talked about before that we would exclude students from school, but essentially it's the same thing. We would be precluded from doing that.
my belief and understanding is that following this legislation, we can still send kids home that have fevers. That would be the same standard, but we would not be excluding students or quarantining students based on exposure to COVID or otherwise.
The idea of a close contact sort of goes away.
Right.
Ms. Harrison?
Leave what it says is that if they have a negative test and list out the specific tests at any point afterwards, then they can come back.
My understanding is that, I believe it was students and staff, that if they were healthy, they could not be quarantined or I believe excluded, but I'll let Mr. Plumley answer that because I asked that specific question today on my email questions also. But, and then if you are actually sick and COVID positive, then as Dr. Horrell said, you could return as soon as you had a negative test, not a certain X number of days. Yes. So, until this bill takes effect, all of the counties who don't have, well, I think honestly it's just Shelby County, but for the rest of the counties in the state of Tennessee, their quarantine or exclusion guidelines are that if both students are masked, it doesn't matter the distance. And then, of course, they also have the opt-out if you're vaccinated or had a positive COVID test in the last 90 days. But since the legislatures seem to have the intent of no quarantines of healthy students, and they're also not wanting to make things rely on masks, I don't think that the state guidelines, which are much looser than the Shelby County current health department guidelines we're bound to, I don't think those will remain the same. And they wrote language that she has to make new guidelines, so.
We have a call every Wednesday, and the health department director will frequently I'll call with the commissioner and her staff, so we hopefully would get some guidelines by Wednesday. I hope.
To remind everyone, the governor hasn't signed any of this yet. So we're still in the waiting period. Any other questions on the TLN report? Yeah.
And it's almost an ask for the future, making the assumption that all 7 or whatever the number of bills are get signed by the governor. I hate saying it this way, but a Cliff's Notes version tells us, I think I heard Chairman Floyd say, where's the line? Does it look like if this, then that, so that we do have some clear guidance?
Both TSBA and TOS are pretty good about writing those up, I think, in clear and easy to understand reports. So I would anticipate that.
Thomas.
Since we're entering the season of runny noses, will we have some guidance for our school staffs? Because, before it was just runny noses, but how will they know when they should take the extra step, or will we have something concrete for them to use to know how to proceed when a student appears to be sick?
I don't know that we'd have anything new, if that's what you're asking. Like
Anything as a result of this, would it still, how do you know when you send the child home?
Well, I mean, we do have COVID tests on site, so we have rapid tests on site, which would be an option if the parents chose to, pursue that. Typically we kind of just depend on teacher reports and student reports. I don't know that we're going to have anything more concrete than that.
Being kind of nebulous, the teacher doesn't know how to proceed. So, we're reverting to what used to be before COVID was a thing, that we knew kids were going to come to school and be sniffly, but I just was trying to look at it from a teacher's perspective. How do I know what to do? So I guess we'll await further guidance.
I think, correct me if I'm wrong, because I know some school districts in other parts of the country were really, really about sending a kid home. Like, I heard stories, a kid coughed one time and they were sent home, that kind of thing. Have we, throughout this whole process, and excluding a fever, an obvious fever, that's always been a thing, we always send kids home. If kids had, and not being a close contact, just simply if they had a cough or a runny nose or something that could be simply a cold or could be allergies or sinus infection, did we have a policy during COVID to send them home for those type of
We ask parents to keep kids home when they're sick. We ask teachers to let us know if a kid appears to be sick, and probably utilize the school nurses, more rigorously than usual. But to answer the question directly, there was no rigorous standard for
I don't think it'll change, because I don't think we ever sent kids home on symptoms only. I think excluding obviously what we've always done, like a fever or something. I think the thing that changed on this is the identifying of a healthy close contact who may have 0 symptoms, and then they were kept out for 10 days at a time. So that's the way I read it, but of course we will all eagerly await what the actual policy is, and hopefully it will, to your point, be clear for us, because it's not fair for schools or staff to be unclear, because there's also fines listed if we don't follow these rules, so they need to be clear what they expect us to do.
Any other comments or questions? Thank you, Ms. Childs, for the report. Very thorough. We appreciate your work. It's not an easy task. This was a rapidly changing environment, and we appreciate your willingness to stand in for us on that front. Having said that, Dr. Hoare, we'll move to the next item.
The next item is the superintendent's report. I typically do my report at the work session and then not at the business meeting. I think since we just had a good discussion on the legislation, if there's no objection from the board, I may do the more thorough report at the business meeting. But certainly if there are any questions from the board, I'd be happy to answer them.
Find out if there are any objections. Any objections to the superintendent not giving a report? All right, what about questions for the superintendent, even though he's not giving a report tonight? Ms. Childs.
Actually, it's not a question for him. I forgot to mention one more thing, since there was so much on the TLN report. I emailed you the TSBA resolutions. So if you could look that over, and then next week, if you have any input for when we are expected, the representatives, to vote, just let me know if you have any input so that I can vote on the way that reflects our board. And there were 2 resolutions from Germantown and I believe Arlington on 3rd grade retention, the TSBA legislative agenda.
Thank you for that reminder. Dr. Horrell, I will just ask, as it relates to construction of the high school, that is still going on. And the athletic facility, specifically the track, can you just give everybody a brief update on where we are with that?
Absolutely. We had a couple of, Check. There we go. I think. Okay. We had a couple of issues that were kind of compounding that have held up the original schedule for the pouring of the track surface that surrounds the football stadium. They had to do with some water, basically, that they found that had been held under the what will now be the visitor sidewalk in front of those bleachers. It's not anything that can't be mitigated. However, they certainly didn't want to proceed until that had been thoroughly explored. So we were able to find the water under there, did some pretty thorough tests of the irrigation system to find out if we felt like there was going to be more water. We don't think there will be. And then we have to dig some of it out and remediate it. Some of it had to do with the slope of the track. So we're spending extra time basically to make sure that we don't have future problems. So long story short, right now we are, pun unintended, I don't know how to, back on track to complete those facilities before the end of the calendar year. So we should be ready for spring track season. And just a reminder, it's really the only other area that we're going to have access to prior to August of 2022. And I know I've said that many times, but the question still comes up. I think people see things and they get optimistic and hope maybe somebody changed their minds. They haven't. The football field house, the baseball and softball facilities and all these things that are proceeding rapidly still won't be turned over to us until this coming summer.
Very good. Thank you, Dr. Horrell. We'll move on to the next item.
All right, next item is the approval of the agenda, which is not valid during the work session, and then the consent agenda. So we will move on to the discussion items for this meeting. We have the approval of the business meeting minutes from October 4th, 2021.
Any discussion on this item? Hearing none, any objection to moving this item to our consent agenda? Hearing no objection, this item will be carried over to our consent agenda. Next item.
Next item is discussion action on contract with Ed Connect for career technical support services.
Dr. Horrell, would you like to speak to this?
I would. We're obviously, I think as everybody knows at this point, preparing to start with our high school instruction and grades at Lakeland Preparatory School. And one of the things we always try to do is figure out if there are folks that can help us do the things we're trying to do better. And in surveying the landscape specifically for career and technical courses, I think which have historically been called vocational courses for folks that are listening, kind of career path things. We looked around at 2 people that know a lot about those areas and have been in that game very recently. I was a high school principal, but have not really had much dealing with CTE in the past 8 years or so, and it's changed pretty dramatically. And 2 people that have that recent experience are John Atkin, the former Shelby County School Superintendent, but for our purposes, the recent Collierville School Superintendent, who obviously opened the largest high school in Tennessee with a number of career offerings, and then his partner, Joe T. Wood, who is basically recognized across the state for his work in workforce development and career technical education. So they have a consulting firm called Ed Connect, and we reached out to them and are grateful that they expressed some interest in working with us to get things moving at the high school. And Mr. Adkin, if you'd like to say anything, I'll put you on the spot. I know you could be here, but
yes, and I'm not sure if you've attended many school board meetings, but the floor is yours, Mr. Atkin.
John Atkin. John Atkin. Proud to be here. I appreciate Dr. Horrell and As Dr. Horrell said, he reached out recently, and we were starting this business, and so we've got a couple of contracts outstanding. This is one of the first ones, so I'm excited about, first of all, working with Dr. Horrell and his staff and you guys, but more importantly, kids at the new high school. And as I mentioned at the 9th grade meeting, y'all got a fantastic opportunity here, and my partner, Joe T, as Dr. Horrell mentioned, he's the man across Arkansas. He's probably more connected than anybody I've ever seen in my life with people, particularly a lot of people across the nation. So he's done a lot of good work. So if you have any questions specifically about the scope or the agreement, obviously I'm here to answer it. But if all works out, we'll hit the ground running. Dr. Horrell and I have already talked today about a meeting that we have to go to pretty soon. So.
Very good. Any questions?
I'll just say I got to hear you speak about it at the 8th grade meeting the other night, and I appreciated the information that you gave to. I've been through it before. I've got older kids or whatever, but there were parents, and I expressed this to Dr. Horrell too. There were parents. There was more parents there that didn't have any experience with the requirements, the focus areas, the post-secondary education, the CTE, and the way it was presented and the information that was given to those parents to try to explain it to those who haven't been through this before. I was very appreciative of the level information and approach that was taken with them to walk them through this process, because it can be very confusing too.
Dr. Horrell's staff that did the majority of that, but the one side of it, the vocational side, career tech side, sure, there's a lot of opportunities out there.
Mr. Burnett.
I just want to say thank you. I'm proud to, for me, sort of like Ms. Harrison, this is not my first rodeo with a child. This is my work every day, is the secondary ed, career and technical education. Extremely excited for us to start that parent education, because many people, as Dr. Horrell said, we're used to calling it VOTEC, and it's considered to be less than. And to me, less than is not making a meaningful career. And I know that we have TCAT graduates that finish high school, go through a TCAT program here in Memphis, and are making 6 figures, 18 months of graduating from high school. How long it took me to not get there. And so it's just so important that education, that we got somebody that knows the right programs to get students into, that lead them to meaningful careers with a life-sustaining wage. And that's so important, and we're glad to have you as a partner.
Appreciate that.
Any other, Ms. Thomas?
So this might be both of you. Can you briefly summarize for people who don't have an 8th grader but will have an 8th grader next year, the kinds of tools that you're using to inform the programs that we're offering and the direction that those programs are heading in? Because this is my first and only rodeo. I was a high school teacher, but I actually have a rising 9th grader who's going to be one of the first kids to go through the programs here. And I just think it might be good to briefly summarize what kinds of tools we're using to help the kids identify their strengths, and what kinds of things we're using to figure out how to make those work with what the labor market needs.
Yeah, I'll start, and then maybe hand it off to you, Mr.
You're
Atkins.
the boss.
Role reversal. He used to be the boss in Shelby County Schools.
Full circle.
Exactly. We did quite a bit of surveying and talking to students about what we think the interests are locally. But what we also know is that the needs of the market and the demands of the market are changing constantly. So when we talk about starting, we've got some ideas and the things based on the response that we've got of, and also check these with kind of local market conditions. But health sciences, cybersecurity, criminology, and business and entrepreneurship were the ones that leapt out. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that's what they're going to be, for the rest of time, but that's where the interest seems to be. And then to me, and we're also planning to use, we've recently gotten U-Science, which is a interest and aptitude inventory. And actually, I picked that up after a session with Joe T. Woods, who had made a partnership with that organization and really presented it in a compelling way. So we're excited about using that, not just finding out what do students want to do, but what might they be good at based on some pretty good internal testing. So the goal then becomes, okay, so you take, for example, cybersecurity. You have that, there's a curriculum, but how do you make the connections to the world of business, to the world of secondary education, post-secondary education rather, that make that meaningful to the student and give them the best experience? And to me, that's where these guys come in.
A lot of work to go, but I think the U Science piece is big, where the kids, each student has some idea of their aptitude and moving forward. But the connection piece that Dr. Horrell mentioned is going to be vital in this. I mentioned the other night at the 8th grade meeting, the Ford plant, Ford and then right up the road. It's going to open the doors for a lot of things that are going on in this area, and a lot of parents moving in that are going to demand some different offerings as well. One thing he did not mention, STEM is obviously huge.
Thank you. That's as well.
One piece of STEM is automation and robotics. Ties right in with what we're hearing right up the road too as well. So, I mean, I really think for our part is sitting down with Dr. Horrell and his staff, pulling all of his data together, sitting down with counselors and the vice principal, and then kind of mapping out pathways for each student as they go through the 12th grade and what that means, with a real heavy emphasis on EPSOs. We talked about EPSOs a lot the other night. There are so many opportunities in this area and this region for students to attain college credit while in high school. And I think that's the thing that the parents need to hear. It's AP and English, those are wonderful, but there's dual enrollment, there's dual credit. Industry certifications now are so big for companies coming in, and they look for those just to get welding certifications, and you can drive up the road and grab a job real quick, and they train you. I attended a meeting this past week at a place and for full disclosure, it's a union shop, but they take students and give them apprenticeships through companies that are part of their union, and they have a 5-year program. It's completely free for the student as long as they remain employed, and when they walk out, have opportunities ahead of them. That's one opportunity. That's one program. There's so many of those out there, and we just want to connect all the Lakeland students, a lot of those, and ensure their success and give them opportunities. Gosh, welders. Son works for an oil and gas pipeline company in Houston. He's all the time, we need welders, we need welders. I mean, that's just one example of what we're looking at.
From a technical perspective, they both have a lot of, one of the things that struck me when we sat down and kind of, interviewed about this, they have a lot of expertise about flexibilities and options in terms of how, what are the requirements for high school graduation, and in terms of even just course coding that may allow us to do things differently in ways that give us more options. Was interesting, and they have some
an innovative
yes.
high school. That's what we want.
I'll speak one more thing. So I did have that conversation with Dr. Horrell, and I was very excited to hear how y'all had expertise where you have like the AP as a focus area, but it could potentially expand or morph into the dual enrollment and things like that, because some parents are more a fan of dual enrollment than a single test, and so that things like that could be transformed into something a little bit different that's unique to what Lakeland students maybe need, instead of just a test on a single day, which are the AP tests. So things like that, that there's so many opportunities like that out there, and y'all have the expertise to bring that to the table.
Thing we resurrected, and I'm showing my age here, were CLEP tests. Those, we formed a partnership that kids got to take it free. Get college credit for free by taking that test, plus your coursework, and you got credit for that too. I think it's just bringing that to Dr. Horrell and his staff and saying, here's all these opportunities, and now let's choose which ones are best.
So I appreciate that. I just wanted, if you're not plugged in as the parent of a current 8th grader, you might not know, how did we select these paths? What did we just choose these? But there was so much planning, and there's so much forward thinking and forward looking, because you want to know what you're offering and where it's leading. And there's a lot of those questions sitting here right now we still don't know, but the opportunity for kids to try these different things and to be able to do the required coursework and maybe be in a particular focus area and do things from CTE. I know back when the earth was cooling and I was in high school, you had to pick one or the other. And I just think that it's remarkable that we have this opportunity for our kids for so many options when they leave Lakeland Preparatory School. You know, they aren't, it's not a narrow thing, it's a broad path. So thank you for everything you're bringing here.
Thank you.
Any other comments or questions? Here, Mr. Burnett.
Just because not everything's been said, but not by everybody. I was in high school when the earth was a degree cooler than Miss Thomas.
Flat
and,
when I was.
and she nailed it in the, and there were separate wings in the building or even separate buildings. And there was a one or the other, and now there's not. That assessment, I mean, it's back in those days, you just built a building and you stuck some kids in this building, you stuck some kids in this building. And today, that informed assessment to triangulate knowledge, skill, ability, preference, work-life balance, and values to provide that student, I'll say child, student, with a clear pathway to go forward, where they don't change majors 5 times to college. I mean, I'm very lucky to say that my son did that. He did that experience in high school, and he's not changed major one time. He'll graduate on time. And it's due in no small part to that interest inventory high school experience.
Thank you, sir. It's always a pleasure. It's good to see you again, and we thank you for your service and your willingness to help us through this endeavor. So,
Look forward to it.
thank you.
Feel free to leave. There's no reason. You're welcome to stay, but you're also welcome to leave.
That
I'm
doorway
gonna turn
was,
this mic off. I don't anticipate public comment.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, would we consider moving this to our consent agenda?
Let me ask if there's any further discussion, and then if you don't have any further discussion on this matter. Is there any objection to carrying this item over to our consent agenda? Hearing no objection, we'll carry this item over to our consent agenda. Next item.
Next item's discussion action on 21-22 tenure recommendations.
Hard to say, is there a motion to get this on the floor, but we don't need it. Dr. Horrell, would you like to speak to this?
Yeah, we have 2 individuals that are up for tenure this year based on the requirements and guidelines of Tennessee law. These 2 have both met the requirements, and those include having 5 years in the system and the last 2 years of applicable data being level 4 or 5, as well as the recommendation of their principals. And those 2 individuals are Sarah Alston and Sarah Donaire at Lakeland Elementary, and I bring these recommendations to you and do also recommend these individuals for tenure in Lakeland school system.
Any discussion on this item? Mr. Burnett.
When you mention, not particularly to them, but when you talk about the applicable data, past 2 years,
What the state law says is that you take the last 2 good years of data, basically. Not good that the teacher did good, but the ones that were
Valid.
Valid.
Valid
Thank you.
data.
Thank you. Valid data. Yep.
just that clarification.
It's part of that holding harmless. We can't hold them harmless for, make them teach an extra year to get tenure so that you go back to the most recent valid data.
But if they did well, let's say last year, then it would count for them, correct?
Now, from last year, we don't have that. We don't even have that data yet. So they're
Any further comments or discussion? Hearing none, any objection to carrying this item over to our consent agenda? Hearing no objection, we'll move this to our consent agenda. Next item.
Next item is discussion action on election of TLN representative.
Again, I start to say, is there a motion to get this on the floor? Any discussion on this item? This is an annual calendar item that the board does annually.
I nominate Ms. Childs.
Dr. Horley, looks like you have something to say.
Well, I was just going to say we wouldn't, sorry, at your place, we wouldn't vote on it at this meeting. But yeah.
Interested in serving again.
Any thoughts or comments?
I think she's done a great job and
Me
been
too.
very thorough, so I appreciate that. But I also don't want to force you if it's not something you're not interested in doing again.
So,
I know we don't vote tonight, but I mean, I will serve at the pleasure of the board.
That's always great news. We'll carry this item over to our regular agenda. We'll take nominations then, and Mr. Burnett, your motion would be in order at our business meeting next week. Without any other discussion on this item, we'll move to the next item.
The next item, if I can, without objection, there are two related items. There's discussion action on approval of the lead custodian job description, and then discussion action on the FY 21-22 salary schedule for said lead custodian.
Dr. Horrell?
Yeah, this was a situation where the individual that had essentially been serving as the lead custodian at one of the schools was departing, and through Ms. Millspaugh's kind of analysis of the situation as the HR director, and then also working with the plant managers, it kind of became obvious that there were certain custodians that basically had more responsibilities, but they didn't have an official title for those responsibilities, and we were looking for someone to serve in a similar role. It just happened that the person who was departing was at the top of the salary schedule, and when we thought about, well, if we replace that person, they'll be making less money than the people that they're kind of over, because the lead custodians work when the plant manager is not there. So we rewrote the job description, or I should say more specifically, Ms. Millspaugh took the lead on that, and to make sure that it was clear that there were certain additional responsibilities to being the lead custodian, and then we adjusted the salary schedule accordingly, so that someone coming in with that level of responsibility would be at a slightly higher level than the regular custodian position.
Any comments or discussion on this item?
I think it's accurate to say in the absence of the plant manager. If there were any issue, the plant manager would still make the recommendation, in terms of any discipline or anything like that.
Any further comments or discussion on this item, Mr. Burnett?
One clarification, so the hourly rate at each of the steps is just slightly higher than a regular custodian, or does it provide that, like a step 0 lead custodian is higher, or
You're right.
is always higher than the step 2 regular custodian? Trying to ask, thank you for interpreting my gibberish.
Any further comments or discussion on this item? We have two items before us. Is there any objection to carry both items over to the consent agenda? I believe this is item number 5 and 6 on our agenda.
We had someone leave, and this would be our current budget. We already have this position budgeted for. This
Yes.
is not an addition. Okay.
Right, we wouldn't need it. You're correct. That's correct.
Any other comments or discussion? Hearing none. Any objection to carrying both items number 5 and 6, over to our consent agenda? Hearing no objection, both items will be carried over to our consent agenda. Next item.
Next item is discussion action on TSBA convention resolutions that I think Ms. Childs alluded to earlier, but.
Yeah, sorry about that. I jumped the gun. I forgot it was later on in the agenda. But as I said before, I had sent you what we got from TSBA on the convention resolutions, which TSBA uses that to develop the TSBA agenda, which they highly, they make a big push to get those items, have legislative action to achieve those items. So for next week, between now and next week, if you can look over it and let me know if there's any resolutions that you are not in favor of or are in favor of. And also, as I kind of gave the preview a minute ago, if you notice anything that you think, oh, we should put that on our Lakeland legislative agenda too, just also be mindful of that. And I did double check. It was Germantown and Arlington that had submitted the resolutions regarding the third grade retention. So, about that. So, questions?
Any comments or questions for Ms. Childs on this item? I believe what we'll do is just leave this item on our agenda for next week, and then people can bring up their thoughts and concerns relating to any TSBA resolutions, and we can discuss and voice our position at that point. Next item.
Next item, again, if I can take the next two, these are just placeholders for the regular board meeting. The board self-evaluations have been completed by the board members and will be transmitted to the board members on the agenda for next week's meeting. And at that point, the superintendent evaluation will also be complete and presented by Mr. Plumley.
Any comments on these? These are just placeholders. We'll carry these items over to our regular business meeting next week unless there's any thoughts or discussion for tonight. Hearing none, we'll move to the next item. Dr. Horrell.
Next item is discussion on the TSBA Legislative and Legal Institute.
Dr. Horrell, would you like to speak to this?
This is one that we put on the agenda annually just to kind of prepare and make tentative plans for that. I'm realizing I need to look that up and see when it is.
February 14th and 15th.
I think one of the things, just looking ahead, we want to decide, do we want to use that as we have in the past as an opportunity to meet with legislators, or approach that in a different way? Sometimes we've done both.
Any thoughts or discussion on this item? I don't know.
Did you say the dates were, Ms. Thomas? I'm sorry.
February 14th and 15th, it's a Monday and Tuesday.
And that is the second Monday. of the
That,
month.
yeah, we have our work session on the 7th and the business meeting on the 14th.
Currently, we have a meeting.
Right. Oh, you're correct. You're correct.
Yeah, and I believe they've changed the format.
Yeah.
Say changed. I guess it's been that way for a couple of years now, but it's not what it used to be.
Not day on the hill. It's
Right,
not.
it's not day on the hill.
They're not like expecting us to kind of meet with them, although some have been accommodating for that. But when we've done that, it has caused us to miss, aspects of the actual conference. So it's kind of a decision point, I think, for the board in terms of just how we want to handle our legislative relations.
There is no, I don't see any links to a schedule right now. It says cancellation deadline is February 1st. To be determined, so.
Why don't we do this? Because what you run into is booking hotel rooms for these things, is decide whether or not we want to book the room and then put this back on our agenda in January. And at that point, we'll commit to go or not to go. If we have to February 1, cancel. Does that make sense?
The other
you, Dr. Hall?
recommendation might be just to go ahead and make the change to the board meeting agenda next week. I'm sorry, the board calendar. Add that to the agenda for next week, yeah.
No, I think it's February of 20, and it was this new format where, and so we did end up going to see some legislators instead of attending the next morning's events. So it will be a decision whether we want to work in some legislators.
I can follow up with TSBA and just see, even if they don't have an agenda, if they can give like a rough timeline of when things are supposed to start and end. They might kind of have an idea of that. And then let you know, because if we do want to meet with the legislators in person, I'll probably start emailing them at the beginning of December, because they book up really fast when they're in session. And I don't, like, if we want to do it, I don't want it to be a barrier that they're full and there's no more time. But I'm not sure, and they may even this time have a lot of time to meet with them, because the one Ms. Thomas and I were at, I mean, it was low turnout from what it had been in the past. And I think because a lot of people are like, well, if I'm not planning to meet with my legislator, then I'm not coming to this thing. I already know a lot of this because I've been coming for years. So I'm not sure how they'll do that, because that was the first time they had done it, and then they didn't have it last year. I'm pretty sure. I think they canceled at the last minute. So I'm not exactly sure, what they're trying to play with the agenda for this year, but I'm happy to attempt to schedule whoever we want to try to get meetings with, and see them in person before we leave town.
So do we just want to carry this item over to next week? Is that, and then we'll go from there?
No,
Is that any objection? Hearing none. We'll move to the next item then.
The next and final item is review of policy manual, section 4.
Again, this is just a placeholder. Any comments or discussion on any policies in section 4? All right. And Dr. Horrell, is there any other business that needs to come before the board?
No.
Any announcements? Ms. Harrison?
Pleasure, thank you.
Any other announcements? Hearing none, is there a motion to adjourn? We have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? We are adjourned.